So today we are at the site of the Hohenzollern Redoubt, and that is this area behind me. This was a strong German defensive position during the Battle of Loos. Now, unfortunately today we can't really see very much. It's entirely overgrown and there's farmland all around. But we came up to have a quick look, and from here we're going to go down to the Quarry cemetery to tell the story of what happened here during the Battle of Loos. So as we start to make our way down towards the Quarry cemetery, I just thought I would orientate us a little bit. So just here behind me is where the site of the Hohenzollern Redoubt would have been. This is kind of just behind the German line, the British line being in that direction, and we're walking round to the Quarry cemetery, which was just behind those British lines. Now, whilst there's not a huge amount to see here physically today, there are some really interesting aerial photos of this spot. So what I'm going to do is a bit of a modern day Google Maps thing, and then overlay that with the aerial photo of the redoubt, because that is quite interesting to see the comparison, and really shows you a little bit of the stronghold and how substantial it was. Now, in the opening phase of the Battle of Loos, 25th of September, men of the 9th Scottish Division moved forwards and captured the redoubt. They did that at a tremendous loss, though, suffering a lot of casualties. The Germans knew the importance of that position, and so they counterattacked it very heavily, and the men of the 9th Scottish were pushed back. That position then stayed in German hands until a concentrated British attack over the course of a few days from the 13th to the 19th of October towards the end of the Battle of Loos. So in that attack, men of the 46th North Midland Division were going to be tasked with moving forwards and capturing the position. It was thought at that stage that the redoubt wasn't that heavily defended, and so those men were actually tasked with moving forwards, capturing that position, moving beyond it and capturing the entire village in this area. Unfortunately, when they left their trenches and started moving across open ground, it became apparent that that wasn't the case, and they came under heavy fire. Now, the problem here was that some men had managed to move forwards and actually had got in to the frontline German trenches of the redoubt. Other men were pinned down in no man's land, and because of the strength of the German fire, the men who were supposed to move up in reserve simply couldn't do so. Overnight, from the 13th to the 14th of October, there were men stuck wounded in no man's land, other men trying to hold their own in the frontline German trenches, and the reserve men were still in the frontline British trenches, unable to move forwards due to the heavy fire. Some of the men who had got into that redoubt and were trying to hold their position there were men of the Sherwood Foresters. The next morning, on the 14th of October, the Germans launched a heavy counterattack to try and push the British troops out. During that time, one man by the name of Captain Charles Geoffrey Vickers of the 7th Sherwood Foresters would win a Victoria Cross. So the men who had got into the frontline trench of the redoubt had built a barrier to try to block off and defend from the Germans, who of course were in their own trenches as well, further along the line of the trench. As the Germans counterattacked, the British troops were trying to build a second heavy barrier. Captain Vickers realised that if they didn't get that second barrier built, then the line would be lost and potentially all of them would be killed. In order to try and hold that position for his men, whilst they built the second barrier, he single-handedly defended that first barrier, launching his bombs at the Germans to try and hold them off as he fought his way. Captain Vickers knew that there was a good chance his own retreat would be cut off when that second barrier was built, but nonetheless he stood there by that first barrier, fighting off the Germans, throwing his bombs. He was fairly heavily wounded, but not before that second barrier was built, managing to protect his men and hold that position. Incredibly, he survived that battle and in fact survived the war. And Charles Geoffrey Vickers, for his bravery, was awarded the Victoria Cross. The fighting here over the redoubt lasted for several days, until eventually the men of the North Midland Division were relieved by men of the 2nd Guards Brigade. During that time, the only real ground captured was that main front trench of the redoubt here. Unfortunately though, in order to capture that little piece of ground, it cost the men of the 46th North Midland Division very heavily. In just those few days of fighting here, the 46th North Midland Division suffered from 180 officers and 3,583 men killed, wounded or missing. The majority of the men who were killed weren't recovered and their graves weren't identified after the war, and a lot of them are commemorated on the Loos Memorial, where we've been in our previous video. Now, as we carry on round towards the quarry, just down at the end of the track here where I'm walking, is the memorial to the 46th North Midland Division. Let's go check it out. Okay, so unfortunately, it is a little bit overgrown. It's a shame to see that it's not been that well kept, but I get it, right? This is a more obscure memorial and they can't all be maintained in the same way. But nonetheless, we're going to see if we can get in here a little bit and have a look at the memorial to the 46th North Midland Division. So again, just briefly to give us a little bit of orientation. So the redoubt that we've just been visiting is up here. The British front lines were in this direction, attacking across here. And so right here is where these men, and along this line, went through that hellish time. And this is where the memorial is, just down the track. And here we have the memorial in honour of the 3,763 officers and men of the 46th North Midland Division who became casualties at the Hohenzollern Redoubt on 13th of October 1915. There's a few other little bits in here as well. There's actually a little plaque here to do with Major Thesinger and Captain Boeslein. We're going to be talking about Captain Boeslein a little bit later on. And a couple of other things here as well. We've got what have we got here? Some kind of memorial to Lincolnshire Friends of the, and a little in French there, and some other bits. And in fact, there's what looks like, I'm assuming, a German grave. I actually, maybe I should have researched this piece a little more. I'll see if I can find out about that and I'll put it into a comment below. But there we go. That's the memorial here. Okay, right, you guys who've stuck with me long enough whilst I've been walking around tracks and fields, I appreciate you. Let's go and look at something that we can show you. We're going to head round literally just across the field here, but we have to go round to the Quarry Cemetery. Now, we've just moved a little bit down the road to the Quarry Cemetery. This is a really interesting cemetery here because it sits below ground level. So you come in the gate at the level where I am now, and it sits below us here in what was a quarry, hence the name, the Quarry Cemetery. So where we are here is just behind what was the British front line, literally just behind where those front lines were. So the cemetery here was used in July 1915 through till June 1916. There were also 2 men buried here in August 1917, but its existence here, built just behind the British front line, was primarily due to the fighting in this area, Fosse 8 and the Hohenzollern Redoubt, of course, where we've just been. It also contains the graves of a lot of the dismounted cavalry who occupied this area in 1915 into 1916. The cemetery here was heavily damaged by shell fire, and so a lot of the graves here were lost during that time, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get down there. Okay, so we've just got down to ground level here in the cemetery, or well, below ground level, I should say. And I thought we'd start just by taking a little look at a couple of the graves that are here, and then we'll tell a little bit more of the story about what happened here. So the first grave I've just picked out to talk about is Walter Hayter, Private Walter Hayter. He was a member of the 1st Battalion of the Northamptonshire Regiment, and he was killed on the 3rd of July 1915 in this area. His gravestone reads, "Their glory shall not be blotted out." Now, one thing just to touch on, you'll see a lot of the graves in here say this, buried near this spot. Now, the reason why you see that on a lot of the gravestones in this cemetery is, as we talked about, this cemetery was used in 1915 and 1916 behind the British front line. However, there was a lot of fighting that carried on beyond that point, and this whole area was subject to heavy artillery fire. That meant that a lot of the graves were destroyed and the grave markers were lost. Of course, men were still known to have been buried here because their comrades had buried them, and so in some cases the gravestones will say near this spot because the original grave markers were lost, but they're still known to be buried in the cemetery here at Quarry Cemetery. And that's why a lot of them have that marking near this spot, because we don't necessarily know the exact spot within the cemetery. So the next grave we've picked out here, again buried near this spot, is the grave of Frederick Prewer, a member of the Suffolk Regiment, killed on the 3rd of October 1915, and he was only 19 years old when he was killed in the Great War. Now, one of the interesting graves in this cemetery is this one right here. This is the grave of Captain the Honourable Fergus Bowes-Lyon of the Black Watch, killed in the Battle of Loos, 27th of September 1915. He was 26 years old. But that's not the only interesting thing about him. So Captain Bowes-Lyon was the Queen Mother's brother, killed here in the Battle of Loos. The other interesting thing about the Honourable Fergus Bowes-Lyon's grave is that it was originally not known to be here. So he is also named on the Loos Memorial, somewhere where we were in our previous video. He's named on a panel there because for a long time his grave was thought to have been missing. But later it was noted, or somebody had recorded somewhere, that actually he had been buried here in this cemetery. And so a grave marker was added with the usual marking that a lot of these graves have, buried near this spot. Captain the Honourable Fergus Bowes-Lyon, killed in the Battle of Loos, 27th of September 1915. So I hope you found this video interesting, taking a look at the area around the Hohenzollern Redoubt, and then here, just up the road at the Quarry Cemetery. If you did enjoy it, do all the usual YouTube stuff for me. I really appreciate it. Like button, subscribe, all that stuff, as we carry on exploring the Loos battlefields. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.